Today marks the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 terror attacks on the U.S. that left at least 3,000 people dead. The Al-Qaeda plane hijacking in 2001 was the first foreign attack on the U.S. mainland in nearly 2 centuries. Hundreds gathered at the 9/11 memorial in New York City as a bell tolled and a moment of silence was held at 8:46 a.m. the moment the North Tower and the World Trade Center was hit 20 years ago. For more on this story, I'm joined by the associate editor at Daily Maverick, Brooks Spector. Mr. Spector, good evening to you, and thank you for your time this evening. Is America the country it was when the Twin Towers fell?
Good evening. Good to be with you. And no, the answer to your question, of course, is it's not the country that it was. It's not the country that it was for a number of reasons, not the least of which the attacks that destroyed the Twin Towers, that hit the Pentagon, and that ended up bringing down a fourth plane by virtue of the passengers rushing the hijackers and plane crashing. It became clear to Americans in a deeply visceral kind of way that I don't think anybody really had thought of before, although they perhaps should have, that the country was vulnerable. The country was part of the world, that the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans did not prevent this possibility, and that it did not require a massive invasion to rock the foundations of the country in this way. Excuse me. But there's a second part of that answer, which is that everything that followed from it, the pledge to deal with Al-Qaeda, the larger invasion of Afghanistan that followed, and then the determination that the U.S. would deal with Iraq as well, neither of which worked out as planned, neither of which had the results that that their proponents certainly had expected, has rocked the country yet again in a new version of vulnerability. And I think it's done it's been an enormous hit to the country's sense of itself as unique among nations, and certainly as the hyperpower, the one country that was the massive superpower, no longer controlled the forces of the planet. And all these realizations have come very hard.
And 20 years on, there's still many questions that are yet to be answered. When you look at some of what people are saying is that they were shocked, 20 years ago when this attack happened, while over the years we've heard some of the investigators saying that for them, the warning signs had been brewing for quite some time. Would you say that those who are still seeking answers as to what exactly happened there have found them?
Well, I think what the investigators, what the various writers, what the various scholars and analysts have pointed to were a whole series of incidents. Let's take them off for you. The 1993 attack on the World Trade Center, which used a car bomb. It didn't destroy the buildings, although it weakened some of the parking area. Then there were the bombings of the 2 embassies, the one in Nairobi in Kenya and the one in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. In 1997, I think it was. And then in 1998, a U.S. naval vessel in the port of Aden, the USS Cole, which was also attacked. And there was ample reason to believe that there were people, there was an organization who clearly wanted to attack the U.S. and its symbols in a way which terribly came to fruition 20 years ago today. I think part of the psychology of it, though, was that too many people in government simply did not believe that fairly simple acts, 19 young men prepared to die, armed with those utilitarian tools, the plastic and metal box cutter, could disable all the security on an airplane, in a major airplane, take control of it, and then pilot it directly into buildings I don't think anybody really expected that, although the analysts were saying something would happen. But quite clearly, many of these broader signs were heard but not deeply understood and integrated into national planning and strategy, and that is a second tragedy, of course.
And when you look at a day like today, we spoke to a security expert here on the channel a little earlier on, who was saying that it's clear that security concerns remain in the United States because we're still seeing some attacks here and there. And I wonder then, what would you say America missed in the lead-up to the 9/11 attacks that it is still missing today, especially because we're still seeing some of these attacks, although not on a grand scale like 9/11?
I don't think they're missing the idea of people want to harm the U.S. Certain groups, certain people are prepared to go to extraordinary lengths up to and including their own deaths to carry out something like that. I think that's widely understood now. Part of the problem, of course, is how do you watch everything? Because if you need to watch everything, then the kind of security and the kind of monitoring and the kind of supervision that you have to engage with transcends all the possibilities of normal human behavior and the kinds of individual freedoms that most Americans take largely for granted. Although remember, in the wake of 9/11, the kind of security measures that you and I and everybody else have to undergo when we use an airplane is now, and it's a world away from where it was 30 years ago. And I remember, I'm old enough to remember being able to actually go out onto the tarmac of an international flight to wave goodbye to people. It's inconceivable that you would do it now. And in the U.S., you take your belt off, you take your shoes off. Everything that you have that's metallic goes through special screening and so forth. And all of that doesn't prevent everything. It just dissuades most people most of the time. And I guess what that means is if you carry that logic all the way through, there's always going to be the possibility of some other smaller perhaps, but catastrophic event. But turn this another way. And just earlier this year, January 6th of this year, a large mob of people gathered on the steps of the U.S. Capitol building, which was, after all, the intended target of the plane that didn't make it, and engaged in what can only be described as a domestic terror insurrection. And that wasn't expected either. And the Capitol Hill police were not prepared for such an event because no one really expected such a thing would happen. Now, do you want to turn the whole country into a security state of authoritarian style? Most people don't want that, and people have gradually gotten used to more and more security. The number of cameras, the number of screening devices that go beep when you walk into a building, and so forth. They're multiplying like rabbits, I guess, everywhere. And we accept it now because we realize the likelihood of the possibility of something happen. But as George W. Bush, the former president on whose watch this happened,